still get tears in my eyes because I work with young children and I think about their future as the story told you. So it's very moving for me. I'm going to introduce Jane now. So Jane is a Southwest Community Organiser, media coordinator for Lock the Gate Alliance. And Jane is also a documentary maker. She's been working for 25 years as a journalist before her life as a documentary filmmaker. She's a lifelong activist and she's produced 2 films. One's called Fracking, which we showed late Billy last year, and also A Crude Injustice, which has just been released. Without further ado, please welcome Jane Hammond.
Thank you, and I've been told to shout so that I can be heard. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I also watched that film several times, and each time I get very emotional. It was an incredible campaign. In Western Australia, we're facing a similar threat that the people of the Northern Rivers faced, and that is fracking, but not for coal seam gas, for shale and tight gas. And at the moment, the state government is deciding whether it will give the green light to fracking or not. Now, please pardon me if some of you know this or most of you know this, but just to recap in case anyone doesn't, we have a current moratorium protecting Western Australia. It's supposed to go till 2020, and that's a moratorium on fracking. And that's for most of the state. We have a ban in the southwest, Peel and metro areas for fracking, but that ban isn't covered by legislation. So we're still vulnerable. The whole state is vulnerable to fracking. And the type of fracking that will happen here is the dirty, really, really dirty and very deep fracking that you see in the US. It's shale oil. There is a campaign in Australia, in Western Australia, Lock the Gate campaign. And similar to the Northern Rivers, we have 22 communities who have already said no to gas fields. They've declared their areas gas field free. And those are all regional communities. And we're working with other communities as well to extend that. In Victoria, they had 75 of these communities when they got their total ban. And so we are pushing for a total ban. On Thursday, we have a rally at Parliament House, Thursday at noon. And we're calling on the West Australian government to bring in a permanent legislated statewide ban on fracking. But we need people on the ground so that we actually don't have to do this. When we don't really want to be doing that, because the police, when they were doing their risk assessment of the BNP blockade, and one of the main reasons that they persuaded the government to rescind those licences is because their risk analysis showed that there would be 2 to 3 deaths from that conflict. Now, nobody wanted that to happen. We certainly don't want that to happen here. But communities across Western Australia are really concerned about the implications of fracking in their communities, particularly in the Midwest, which are farming communities, and in the Kimberley, which is beautifully pristine. But Buru Energy, one of the companies, wants to get in there, and they've already done test fracking. In the Kimberley, we know from the submissions to the WA fracking inquiry that Buru Energy has admitted that in its flowback fluid, that's the stuff that comes up the pipe with the gas, the test fracking, the fluid that came up, they had to admit in their submission that in 2015 they found elevated levels of radioactive material, barium and boron. Now, their solution to how they're going to deal with this problem of radioactive waste from fracking is to give it to cattle. Now that is, I'm not making this stuff up. We actually got the Sydney Morning Herald to write a story about this, and it's there on page, I think it's 42 of Buru's submission, that this is a beneficial use of this fracking water. This is beneficial to the pastoral industry in the Kimberley to give cattle contaminated water. It's a disposal issue. It's unbelievable, and it puts at threat a $17 billion export industry, but they don't seem to care about that. So one of the most recent research is showing us that these radioactive materials that are coming up aren't just what they call norms or naturally occurring radioactive material. They're trapped deep within the shale, and the briny fluid that goes down reacts with that shale and intensifies that radium, releases radium-238 that comes up the pipe. Now that has a half-life, as I understand it, about 5 years. So that means it's pretty radioactive. And so what are they going to do with this stuff? They're putting it in these holding ponds that we saw there, like the coal seam gas. They want to leave those in the Kimberley. Now the Northern Territory, they've just given the go-ahead to fracking. Over half, more than half, 51% of the territory. They had a similar process we're going through. But even that report said you can't leave your fracking waste in holding ponds. Now we already know, because the Yaru people, the people who are east of Broome and don't want fracking on their land but do not have a choice, the government, there's no choice. No one has a choice to say no. You can say yes, but you cannot say no. They've already said no, but in earlier negotiations, when Buru was working with the Yaru, they said, you're not having open ponds on our land. And so Buru said, well, we can't possibly ship out the waste in these massive 40 million litre tanks because there would be so many truck movements, and who's going to clean out those tanks? This stuff is so toxic, it presents a health and safety risk. So Buru is telling us it's okay to leave it on the land, it's okay to give it to cattle, but it's not okay for people to clean it out of tanks. It's that toxic. So there's so many issues why we should be fracking. And I'm only talking about one at the moment, that's just fracking waste, which is another hidden problem. There's also the incredible amount of water they use. Millions and millions of litres go into every frac. So we can't afford to waste that sort of water, we can't afford to contaminate water, we can't afford to have a mistake. If, as you saw in the Medday effect, that the cement that's supposed to hold these tubes down for forever, we already know after a few years they get cement cancer. So there's so many problems. And there's so many problems in the contamination and the health impacts as well. But the government's telling us, yeah, it's okay, it'll be far away from people, don't worry about that. So we've got these multiple problems, and the latest one is the impact of climate change. The impact that fracking Western Australia will have on global emissions. We had 50 eminent scientists, many of those climate scientists, just a couple of weeks ago present a letter to the state government calling for fracking to be banned, that we cannot afford to exploit the resources that we have got under the ground in the Kimberley alone, because it's so massive. It's something like the largest, I think they're saying the largest untapped potential greenhouse gas emission bomb that is on the planet. And that's in our Kimberley. And that's what Buru Energy and Mitsui want to get their mitts on and frack the life out of. So we have a choice, and we have it right now. It's really important right now that we tell the government that we don't want this in our state. Because we have a choice. We don't have to put our bodies on the line and cement ourselves in. We can just try and put some pressure on our government to say we want a statewide permanent legislated ban on fracking. And we have a petition at the back there. We've been collecting for a couple of months. We have 13,000 signatures on that petition. This isn't an online one for armchair activists. This is people going out to everywhere. We've got them coming in from Kew and from Kununurra, all over the country, all over the state. We've got people to sign this saying they're really concerned. So please join in signing that. Please, if you can, come to the rally, tell your friends. This is our opportunity to really push this. You know, I know there's so many issues that we can all be involved in, but this brings in so many different issues, including our water and our climate. So yeah, I'd urge you all to do that.
Thanks, Jane. Anyone have any questions for Jane?
how often do they do it? Or how, like, is it done every, I don't even know, is it done every month or every...
It's kind of random in that sort of thing. That they start off by coming with a huge rig, and then they go down 3 kilometres, and they turn the corner into the shale, and then they blast with a mixture of chemicals, lots and lots of water, and tons of sand. That blast opens cracks and creates fractures. That's what's called fracking. And then the sand grains come in, and they hold open those fractures so that the gas can come up. So after about a year of the gas being produced, it starts to run out because it just doesn't work that much. So these days they do multiple fracks, but you can only do that so much. So it starts to sort of taper off. It won't just keep going. So then you just move over here and you do another one, and then you move over here and you do another one, and we end up with this popped landscape that we see. One way they're sort of getting around it, because we've made such a fuss about the fact that you look from the air and it looks like a pincushion, is that they've got these things called mega wells. So they're putting 10 massive wells all together in one area, and they're going down and they're going 5 kilometres here, there. They're snaking out, octopusing out all around, and just sucking the life out of everything, getting every last petrol out of the ground, and that's God knows what that's going to create as well. So yeah, it's kind of an inexact science. Like we've been working with in the Witcher Range. They said they couldn't frack the Witcher Range, which is in Margaret River. But in 2004, because they couldn't frack the normal fluid, water, because the sand grains get stripped and that it doesn't work, they thought, I know, we'll put down some diesel. So they fracked with diesel. Now that went down, turned the corner, whatever, and it's still down there. Most of that diesel oil is still down there. The company went broke. They lost $1 gazillion on that, $11 million. They capped the well and they walked away. And now it's illegal to frack with diesel oil. Well, thank you. And I think in 10 years this will be illegal to do any of this fracking because it's just insanity.
How many drills rigs have already been set up?
Yeah, at the moment we've just done test. There's just testing.
What about Australia-wide?
Well, just in Queensland, where part of what we saw, they've just given the licence for another 5,000. So it's thousands and thousands because when you go into a gas field, the gas moves around like this as you puncture it and sort of blobs over there like squeezing a balloon sort of thing. It just blobs. And so what they do is they try to solve this problem, and they've got algorithms where they say pop there, pop there, pop there, pop there, pop there in that pattern. We'll maximise it. So in, say, the Witcher Range, we had the petrochemical people from Curtin University presented a paper in Saudi Arabia in February this year, telling us that if they popped in this pattern, 50 wells in this tiny area, they'd get the gas, no problem. Even though they can't theoretically frack, they could do it shorter. Short, sharp, quick fracks, bang, 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 and there's our forest in the Witcher Range. But the government said, no, we won't allow fracking in the southwest because it's too precious. And because it's a tourist thing. But what about the Kimberley? What about the Midwest? What about our climate? What about our water? What about our future? There doesn't seem to be much economic benefit in this industry. There's a new book out called Saudi America, and it talks about basically what the fracking industry has done in America. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme. It's flourished because of very, very low interest rates. And some people have made a hell of a lot of money on it, and people who live next to it are suffering the results of that. And a lot of pension funds are going to lose all their money when this becomes a stranded asset because the economics of this industry do not make sense. And when people believe that, hear that first and say, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But the top 60 fracking companies in the US, they have got losses in US, $9 billion every quarter. So they're losing money hand over foot, but more money's coming in. So you're sort of like a dodgy financier. You know, you put money in this property and you think that if you want to get your money out, too bad, sort of thing, if you're a permanent investor. I mean, I don't really get the whole thing, but it doesn't make sense. It's also not going to give us a lot of jobs. So really, why would we do this?
Thanks, Jane. So if you want to have ask Jane another question before she goes, she'll be at the store there for a few more minutes. So.